Hello YouTube gardeners. I am doing this add-on video, a continuation of the video that I did on 3 common problems in growing peppers, because I've gotten several comments that the volume is too low and hard to hear. The audio is having a problem. So I'm going to go ahead and do this video and then attach a link to the original video so that if there is problems listening to the original video, then you'll be able to hear the 3 common problems that you can experience in growing pepper plants. Now, this pepper plant that I am focused on is a jalapeno, and in the original video it was basically just a stick. And you can see in here, let me get right in there, that is the original stem, and it didn't have, in the original video, it didn't have any of this growth at all. It had no leaves, or very little leaves, because I had pruned it back. It was a jalapeno plant, a pepper plant that was growing in an area where it was experiencing way too much water. It was very new, small plant, and so the first problem that I went over was overwatering. Overwatering is definitely a common problem when growing peppers and chilies. Just as far as new transplants, once the pepper plant is nice and established, then watering isn't as much of an issue. But when it's a very young transplant, if it gets too much water, it's definitely a problem, because you will start seeing the leaves turning yellow down in this area. In the bottom part of the plant, they'll yellow, they'll start dropping, and that is a clear indication that your pepper plant is getting too much water, and basically what's happening is the roots are drowning. So if you're experiencing that problem, what you want to do is cut the water back dramatically. What I did with this plant was I turned the water off. It was in an area where it was planted with carrots and other vegetables that received lots of water, and I moved it to this area where I'm growing tomatoes. I turned the water off to make sure that it wasn't getting much water, or any water actually, and I let it dry out. Once it dried out, I gave it a nice deep water, and then from there I checked the soil with a moisture meter to make sure that it stayed around moist to dry. So now you can see how well it's doing. It's just beautiful, and it's not experiencing any problems with calcium. It's got some blossoms setting in, so I'm going to go ahead and give it an Epsom salt water, and it's really just bounced back. It's doing great. So I'm going to attach a picture of what it looked like originally, and this is a good example of how, even though if your pepper plants or your chili plants are experiencing that problem where they're getting way too much water, the roots are drowning, and it looks like your pepper plant's dying, it's not a lost cause. You just need to cut the water back dramatically, let the roots dry out, then give it a nice deep water, and then from there just let it get regular water, but not high amounts of water. You want to keep it around the moist to dry level. And let me go over here. What I've done in my pepper bed is installed these soaker drippers. So it's irrigation. Actually, this is another pepper plant that was in my original video, and it was also a stick too. and it was from the same problem. It was in an area where it was getting way too much water. Let me zoom in here and see if you can see the original. Yep, there we go. So you can see the original cut, because what I did was, when I noticed the pepper plant was suffering from overwatering, I cut all of the growth off, I topped it, I placed it in this pepper bed where it was going to receive very low water. It was planted in an area where it was receiving way too much water, and you can see now it's doing really, really well. These soaker irrigation lines work wonderful. I just switched to these recently, and this way they'll get regular water. And then what I do with my pepper plants is they get that regular soaker drips each evening to cool off, and then I give them a compost tea water twice a week, and they'll also get an Epsom salt water every other week. But when I see fruit setting in, like here, this pepper plant is starting some more fruit, then I'll do an Epsom water, and then I'll water again with an Epsom salt water in about 10 days. These three plants are much smaller because, like I had mentioned, this one initially was way behind all these others because it was dying, and I cut the growth back, I topped it, and now you can see it's doing much better. It's actually got a blossom on it, so I am going to be getting fruit off of this. And then these other two, the reason why those are so small is I just got them in a couple weeks ago. Alright, so that is the first problem that you could experience in growing pepper plants, and that is overwatering. When you initially get them planted, if they get too much water, the roots are going to drown out, and it's going to stunt the growth of the pepper plants. Once they're nice and big and established, then they can handle more water, but you don't want to do that just at the beginning, the first couple of weeks. You want to make sure that the watering is low, and that when you use one of these moisture meters, which I like to use at the beginning when I'm getting my transplants in, you want to make sure that it's reading at a moist to dry level. And then it seems like the pepper plants really like that because their roots will go deep and search out water, and it really encourages root development, and they'll get nice strong roots that way. But you definitely want to make sure that your pepper plants are getting regular water, just not high volumes of water, because that brings us to the second problem that pepper plants experience, which is calcium deficiency. So you will end up getting blossom end rot, and I don't think I have any that are experiencing that right now. I do see one pepper that is experiencing a sunburn, sun scald. But if you look back at the original video, even though the sound is poor, I do have examples of the blossom end rot in that first video, and that is from a calcium deficiency. And what I found was mine was related to drought tolerant conditions. So you could either be lacking calcium in your soil, which what will happen is you'll start getting, here's the fruit, you'll start seeing rotting going on, and what's happening is the plant doesn't have enough calcium to develop the cell walls. So the cell walls are basically collapsing in on themselves, The calcium is what is promoting the cell growth, and you'll also notice some issues with the leaves as well. I did have several of these plants experience calcium deficiency, and right now I'm trying to look and see if I could give an example of the leaves. They'll kind of get a bubbly texture and they'll look really wrinkled. Gosh, I'm not seeing any offhand. Let me see, maybe this one. No, that's just a new leaf. But I'll look around for an example. But if you see the bubbling happening on your leaves and they're looking kind of wrinkly looking and they're not developing properly, then that is also due to lack of calcium, because the cells in the leaves aren't developing properly as well. So a way to avoid that is making sure that when you plant your peppers, that your soil is the correct pH level, around a 6.5, and that you get compost added into your soil. Make sure that you have a good quality, high nutrient soil. I like to use Dr. Earth. I added compost, but you want to make sure that your compost is all the way matured. Otherwise, you can have problems if the compost is not done cooking. And then you want to add also, what I like to add is Dr. Earth, and I'll attach a quick clip at the back of this video of what I use, but it's I believe a 463, but it's got high calcium, so it's got about 7.5 of calcium, and that way you're getting your transplants in into a soil that is got all the nutrients that it requires. And you'll also want to side dress once you see some blossoms develop, and then at that time I will also side dress with the Dr. Earth and make sure that they're getting another dose of calcium. Alright, so that is one of the ways to avoid blossom end rot. If you experience blossom end rot, which I did in a couple of the pepper plants, as I explained earlier, or as I had mentioned, I believe it was due to drought tolerant conditions, and that is one of the things that will bring that on. If you experience that, you want to make sure that your pepper plants are getting regular water, and then you could go ahead and prune or harvest back the growth. See, I shouldn't have even left this chili go to red, because we like to roast these once they are mature and green. We'll roast them and get them frozen for future green chili dishes that my husband is so amazing at making. But if you do experience blossom end rot, then prune off and harvest off the fruit, so that, let's say you have mature fruit, then you can leave the smaller growth, and then whatever calcium that the plant has available can focus its calcium towards the new fruit growth. So that's one of the ways that you can address blossom end rot if you are experiencing it. One thing that I am going to make sure that I start doing is, when my pepper plants are young and I just got them transplanted, and if I see fruit set in, I'm going to go ahead and prune those off until the plants get more mature, because I believe that may have been one of the things that added to my calcium deficiency in the fruit development. The plants were really young and they started setting in a ton of fruit, and I was so excited at all the chilies. I got so much last year. So I was really excited to see all the chilies developing that I let them go, and the plants were really too young to develop all that. So it really started sucking all the nutrients and the calcium from the plant. All right, so that is number 2, and that is a calcium deficiency. And then the third problem that you can experience in growing peppers and chilies is if your nitrogen level is too high, then it can interfere in the setting in of fruit. So I did have Dr. Earth soil in this bed, and then I did add compost, and I side dressed with the Dr. Earth fertilizer, but it is low in nitrogen. I personally would not side dress with something that had high nitrogen, because that is a problem that you can experience. So just to review real quick, we have 1, overwatering at the beginning of putting in your pepper plants can stunt their growth, can cause the roots to drown out. So you want to keep the moisture level at a moist to dry. You certainly don't want it to be wet. And then number 2, calcium deficiency can occur, which leads to blossom end rot. So you want to make sure that your pepper plants have nice, consistent water supply, but not too wet. So you don't want them to experience drought-tolerant conditions, and you want to make sure that you are feeding them with high calcium fertilizer. So organic fertilizer is good, and then something that is high in calcium. Third is avoid too much nitrogen in your pepper bed, or if you're growing in containers, avoid too much nitrogen so that you don't have a problem with your fruit setting in. And then lastly, and I'm adding this was not in the original video, but I did experience it this year in my pepper bed, and you can see this plant has been butchered, and it literally did get butchered. I cut it back to just about no growth. Right here is a spot where I had a volunteer watermelon plant growing. I'm gonna just kind of pan over here real quick. And I pulled it up just recently. Actually cut it back severely about 2.5 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago, because I experienced black leaf spot. So I got a bacterial infection on the leaves, and I believe it started with the watermelon plant. So that is something that can happen that you want to keep an eye out for. Basically, if you have, well, there's lots of bacteria in the soil, and when you're watering, if the bacteria in the soil bounces up onto the leaves, then especially if it's in the evening, it's gonna maybe grab a hold, start growing and spreading onto the rest of your leaves, and basically it will destroy your plant. And I have heard that if you find the black leaf spot, then your plant is basically, you could write it off. But I think I caught it really early, and I really butchered it back. I cut all the watermelon leaves off that I saw that had the bacterial growth on it, and I cut all of the leaves off of this pepper plant, and I thought I'll just see what happens. You can see that this pepper plant looks pretty pathetic, but I was going to remove it, and I haven't seen any new bacterial growth since I have pruned it back. So I'm just keeping an eye on it, a really close eye on it, to make sure that if I see anything coming back on the leaves, then I'm just going to remove the plant completely, because I don't want it spreading to the other plants The rest of the pepper plants are doing really great. Got lots of fruit development. I've already harvested quite a bit. I should have harvested these already. I'm going to go ahead and do that very soon. And then in the original video, the last thing that I went over was a tip, a growing tip, which was when you see the setting in of fruit blossoms, then give it an Epsom water, and then in 10 more days give it another Epsom water, and that will help in the development of bigger fruit. Alright, I apologize for the audio being so poor on the first video. I hope this one is better, and I hope that you enjoy growing your peppers. If you have any questions, let me know. And if you like this video, give me a thumbs up and subscribe for future how to grow and do-it-yourself garden ideas. Alright, enjoy your garden.